Hello and welcome once again to the show we are calling Creative Therapy Lockdown Edition. This is episode 3 and once again I am joined to talk all about inspiration during lockdown with my good chum Steve French. Excuse me while I'm just looking at this. There we go.
Hello, how are you?
Hello Steve, how are you?
Not too bad, yeah, all good. Episode
Good.
3.
Just to episode 3. Amazing. I know I keep putting this in, I'm going to remove that.
Yeah, but it looks really cool. That's what singers do, halfway between a number that they're doing live, and they pull it out, and it just looks cool, doesn't it?
And you've got to just pull it out. And I keep trying to put it in because I can hear you better, but then I can hear myself too much, and it's also horrible. So just to explain to people who are watching this, even though this isn't going out live, that was our intent, but it proved a little challenging at this stage and in lockdown conditions. But we are filming and cutting it live, so to speak, so that's why I appear slightly distracted and looking down all the time, which is very unprofessional. I should be looking straight at you. But so if you see me do that, I try to cut to Steve when I do that, so you can't see me. But then he can see me, and it looks like I'm not listening to him.
No, I completely... You're like a marionette at that end, aren't you? Spinning lots of plates.
That's the trouble. My brain only can focus on one thing at once.
Yeah, me too.
And so it proves a bit tricky to concentrate on what's coming up or what I'm doing next and listen to you and then respond to you. So it's a real skill. I really admire those people on the news.
Yeah,
anyway.
I don't really know how they do that. They're kind of, they're probably split brain people, aren't they? That they can kind of concentrate on doing one thing to one group of people whilst listening to instruction in their ear, which would drive me around the bend.
I would imagine you get better at it after a while, don't you?
Yeah.
It must be a skill you learn to do
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
So before we get stuck into talking about inspiration during lockdown, we probably should talk about how our lockdown looks are coming along. Your beard's looking fine.
Yeah, I've had mostly good feedback about it, and I had some people yesterday who weren't overly keen on it. They said it aged me.
How rude.
Well, there you go. I mean, I know them pretty well, so they were quite happy telling me how it is.
I think it is an aging thing. I think it's true. You know, mine's greyer than yours. You've got more dark in yours than mine. Mine's going through this bit where it's just starting to have rogue hairs go a bit straggly. And because I don't know whether you've done any clipping or cutting or anything. I've just let it grow.
Yeah. I didn't do any clipping for ages, and then only recently I've started. When you kind of pass a mirror and you see there's these ones trying to escape here and there. I've got rid of those, but then I didn't know whether that was just going to exacerbate the itchiness, because then those long ones that were trying to escape are shorter, and they're probably more the culprit.
So did you just manually clip those back, or do you use a trimmer? What trimmer?
Well,
a hedge
both.
trimmer.
So I've got a pair of little kind of blunt-ended scissors that I occasionally snip, but I also have clippers, which I kind of handheld, without a guard on it.
Just gently tied it a bit. Yeah. I think I may be at that stage. You're ahead of me with the beard, so I'm probably a couple of weeks behind you. And I've never been a very stubbly, beardy person anyway, so I guess that's why it's a bit scrawny. Yeah,
you have fairly smooth cheeks.
Yes, thank you. You know that from all the kissing. Anyway, we must save this conversation for our other channel, Beard Talk.
Yeah, exactly.
The hipster channel we've got going on.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about today, Steve?
We're talking about inspiration. I very, very nearly revealed something that we were going to talk about in another episode, because I think that was the thing we talked about maybe doing to begin with. And I suddenly remembered that we're actually talking about inspiration. So that was probably a fairly inspirational thing for me to do right there.
Absolutely. And I think the good thing is, from our discussion earlier about what we were talking about, is we suddenly became inspired and produced 3 episodes. So we've got the next 2 lined up, I feel.
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
Which is good. Because we are slightly concerned of talking over stuff we've already talked about, because what we don't want to do particularly is go too in depth on these creative therapy things, because I'm kind of wanting to save those themes, and we've got a whole long list of themes to talk about when we start doing the show in a less lockdowny, bit more proper, less beta as we're calling this channel at the moment, way. So it'd be nice to do this properly, in the studio and stuff. But for these sort of more rough and ready shows, we still want to talk about these subjects, but I kind of want to go into them properly when we do it properly. That may be just my insanity, but I don't know. We're all about production value, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
So inspiration during lockdown specifically. Have you had any? Does it exist?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it before, and I can't really remember whether we touched on it in episodes that didn't work for whatever reason. So again, going back to the whole thing about concerned about repetition, it might be that we're not repeating anything. It's just those episodes, or maybe people didn't hear me.
We had a lot of that problem.
I think the thing that's been inspirational for me mostly during lockdown is people, just everyday people, and how the people that you don't expect to really be that creative without being derogatory. That they don't. Outside of lockdown and COVID-19, they haven't necessarily displayed any kind of creative urges, and then all of a sudden. In fact, I'll use an example. A friend of mine posted something on Facebook yesterday, and it was he's married and he has a young son of about 12, 13, I think. And they basically published almost like a musical skit that they did at home with all three of them involved. And I was watching it thinking, okay, well, this is unusual. I've not seen you do anything like that before. And it's that sort of thing. It's where, all of a sudden, the people that you see doing fairly normal, in inverted commas, things, outside of lockdown, are producing hugely creative things online. And it's a lot of people. It's not just a couple of people.
Absolutely.
Everybody is partaking in a degree of creativity.
People are definitely stepping up, aren't they? And there's obviously fantastic amount of content from those who are creative anyway, so bands and actors and singers and people are all getting online, aren't they, and putting stuff out and putting out free stuff, and the theatres are putting out shows that they've pre-filmed that normally perhaps you wouldn't get to see, or unless you go to see one of the cinema NT live things. They're all now coming out for free, which is wonderful. So there's a lot of better stuff out on the internet now than all the rubbish that used to be out there. So that's great. I guess people have got more time on their hands, and then even the people who aren't perhaps professionally creative, if you want to call it, don't do it for a living, have got time on their hands and are joining in and trying their hand at stuff. So that's a good positive thing, isn't it, that's come out of all this?
Exactly. So that's one of the things that have kind of been inspirational, and it's from people editing things together that maybe scenes from films or whatever, and they've edited them to different sorts of music or re-edited them, and all the way through to artists and photographers and people like that are kind of recreating works of art, like the Scream, for example, and they might recreate that with their 5-year-old kid or whatever. It's that sort of thing, and it's it's across the board. Everybody seems to be doing it.
Absolutely. So moving away from the inspirational stuff that's already out there, how have you found, and how do you get inspired yourself? Presumably watching those things inspires you a bit to go, well, I need to be doing that. And putting aside what we spoke about last week slightly of our struggle to do that and the procrastination and getting motivated, how do you get motivated? How do you feel inspired? And do you have a sort of process or a go-to thing?
It's a couple of things. So the first thing, I guess, it would be when I have kind of time on my hands where I'm not doing something else. So as an expert, either driving, where I've got concentrate on driving, but because it's automatic and I can kind of let my mind wander, and I tend to come up with ideas for things then. And also because I've got 2 dogs, when I'm walking the dogs, I'm kind of mooching about out in the in the wilds, and that's when ideas come to me too. So that's kind of when inspiration occurs. And then the second way is by watching what other people do, that I aspire to do. So, for example, we want to make films. We're filmmakers, and it's the thing that we would be doing if we had the time right now. So when you see people that are your peers and they're producing, films on zero budget and across a period of time, and documentaries and stuff like that. So it's things like that inspire me.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think I definitely you need to have time, to get to those. I know. I think we touched on this last week, so watch last week's episode, folks. But touching it a bit about the I've discovered over the years that I need a lot of time. I think I mentioned the thing that I need to go and, like when you're writing your second album, you lock yourself up in a farmhouse for 2 or 3 months or whatever to write your album. That I think I've learned is the situation that I'd need to get there. So time is the big thing I need to do it, which is what I struggle with at the moment. But keeping this positive, I think music and movies are my things. I think I have to go through this process of before I sit down to try and create something myself. I'm just going to quickly push that plug in because I'm seeing my light. The plug is half falling out, which looks hugely dangerous. The light hasn't gone off yet. The light's not gone off yet, but it's like one of those Euro 2-pin plugs into an adapter.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just half hanging out, so the whole thing was about to blow up. So I think in order to get to that point where I sit down with my blank piece of paper to write something or to come up with an idea for a photo shoot or something like that, I have to sort of get there and I have to get into the zone. And in order to do that, definitely listening to music, I think, definitely. We're photographers, filmmakers, whatever, watching movies. You watch other movies and get excited by those and get inspired by those. So I think that's the thing. My ideal thing would be to spend a day listening to some music, a day watching some movies, or a week, having a week just to do that, get into that sort of mind space of wanting to do something myself and come up with ideas. I mean, the coming up with ideas is a completely separate thing because, where do they come from? But I think they come from music and watching movies and going for walks and watching the news and reading what's out in the world. But I definitely need to get myself into that zone, which is hard to do because you require the time and watching stuff. But I do find movies and YouTube, in fact, and partly sort of why we're doing this, I find myself watching or going through phases of watching a lot of YouTube channels of other people's shows and things. And I think when we delve deeper in a sort of less lockdown edition of this show, we can sort of go into what YouTube channels inspired us and what other content creators are doing. But I do suffer a little bit from that viewer not a doer thing, where I like to watch other people do it, and that gets me really inspired. But really what I know I should be doing is turning that all off and not viewing, doing it myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the procrastination thing, isn't it, that we were talking about last week. It's one of those things that you've got to really try hard not to compare what you're doing or not doing to those people that are actually inspiring you.
Absolutely. And not compare and not just piss your all time away watching 2 hours of other people getting off producing great YouTube content. Actually sit there with your blank piece of paper, put some music on the background and produce stuff yourself, which is kind of, I think, getting all inception and talking about our own channel and this Mind Dispute channel, this creative therapy section of that, is we sort of said, hey, we're all on lockdown. This is a good excuse to force our hand to put some stuff out on this channel, because we've been talking about doing this for a long time and sort of putting it off and never having time to get round to it and developing it. And actually, I think we then discussed, screw it, let's just do it, and we've ripped the plaster off and started producing these little shows in whatever state they are.
Should be the channel tagline, don't you think? Screw it, let's just do it.
Screw it, let's just do it. Write that down quickly. Copyright. We own that, everybody. That's it. That's that whole thing. And so I guess bringing it back to the lockdown thing and being inspired, I think I probably, in the small amounts of time I had, watched a few more YouTube videos during lockdown because I wasn't beating myself up that I should be working, because there isn't any work at the moment, and hence felt the need to get all this set up and start putting some stuff out. And I'm feeling quite motivated for when everything does go back to normal, that we get this really going properly and really throw into it.
Exactly.
So YouTube is a big tool for me.
And as you say, the very fact that we're in lockdown has made this happen to a certain degree. So that is a huge positive to come out of lockdown.
Totally.
That we've actually got this thing going, having talked about it for so long.
So I've also got written down here, we've got music and movies and all those things. Drugs as a tool to be inspired! ! I do, to be honest, feel quite inspired after a few glasses of wine. I'm much more motivated. I'm sure you're aware of this, Steve, because you often get lots of WhatsApp messages from me about developing this. On a Saturday night when I've had a few glasses of wine, I suddenly get much more motivated, which is interesting. And even in even a coffee, I have a coffee mid-morning and just it sort of gives me that little thing, and I feel a little bit. It either makes me feel pukey or it makes me feel a bit fired up to do something. So
that wine, is that red or white wine that we're talking about?
It's usually red wine.
Really? Okay, that's interesting, because red wine I love it and I drink a fair amount, but it makes me want to go to sleep. So it actually doesn't have the same
it's a tricky balance. Effect. You've got to medicate yourself with the right balance, because it can do that. Actually, it doesn't really make me go to sleep. It makes me drunk. And therefore it does. And this is the thing. I've got coffee, alcohol, other ? Because I do always have this thing that a lot of really creative people, and I like to use Jim Morrison as an example, were off their tits quite a lot. I don't know what certificate this channel is. We're off their, heads quite a lot on all sorts of drugs, and they managed to produce the most wonderful sort of stuff. I mean, they had tragic lives as well, and obviously there's the real dark side to all of that. And I think this is another area which I think is for another deeper conversation on inspiration, which I'd want to save for the sort of proper episodes of this. But I find it that very interesting thing, the whole drugs used in creative capacity, and because I don't do drugs or anything other than the soft drugs like alcohol and coffee, whether we're limiting our creativity from ever really.
I know what you mean. I'm really fascinated by that whole question, especially when it comes to musicians, and when you read various biographies and you find out the likes of say Guns N' Roses, for example, that would write a seminal album like Appetite for Destruction, I think it is, where they were all off their faces on cocaine. I might be unfairly labelling some of them in there, because I think maybe Axl wasn't quite as bad. I think he was just a drinker. But even so, a lot of it's a known fact, a lot of high-level creativity is drug-fueled to a degree. And I find that fascinating, because I feel like, as I say, with alcohol of any quantity, it has the opposite effect on me. I feel good for nothing. I don't feel like I could do anything, let alone remember a really complex guitar solo.
I mean, these people are wired differently, aren't they? Like you say, how they can go out and play to a massive concert hall of people when they're just off their faces. How it's incredible. So that I think that's a very interesting subject, and one that we can delve into a lot further in another episode. So interesting stuff. So I mean, we slightly touched on challenges of inspiration. I think we talked more about this last week, and I've got the usual. And for me, it's things like lack of time, having a family, and especially in lockdown, most of my time is spent looking after the kids and stuff like that. So I don't have the time to do stuff, and then therefore what I need to be motivated requires a lot of time. So that goes against each other, and so many distractions. There's always something else to do. But I think we discussed in the last episode, didn't we, a bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly. And basically, that brings us round quite neatly as distractions go. In the modern age, Netflix is one of those rather major distractions that, I don't know about you, but distracts me to quite a high degree. And one of those things that I've watched on there recently, and so have you, which is why we're probably going to discuss it, is a particular documentary about a film in the 80s. Do you want to go into that a bit more detail, really?
I thought Steve got me onto this documentary a few weeks ago, and so I texted him the other day and said, "Hey Steve, I'm watching that documentary on Netflix. It's great, isn't it?" And he was like, "What's that?" The one you told me about. No, I didn't tell you about that. I said, "Oh, all right, well, watch this documentary. It's great. It's great." Yeah. And it may have been my Chum Ken, who recommended it to me. He sometimes watches these, so maybe he'll say, yeah, that was me. But it's basically, we're both fans of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and this is a documentary called Raiders, and I've got a... that's not the button. That's just brought up a lower third. Don't you look? How professional is this? If I put this up. So this is a film, a documentary that a bunch of youngsters made back in the 80s over 7 summer holiday breaks. And they basically remade Raiders of the Lost Ark shot by shot on their VHS camera or whatever. So you saw them remaking this film, but with their limited budgets and skills and expertise and quality on the cameras and stuff, and as the film went on, they got older because it was over like 7 years or something, and so this documentary looks at that film they made, and at the same time sort of reunites them because they just missed one scene out, and that was the big fight scene with the plane at the end and the big dude that Indiana is fighting.
Pat Roach from Alvida's Pet.
Oh, was it?
It was, yeah.
Oh wow, I didn't.
He was always a bit of a burly in some of those kind of big Hollywood films. Yeah.
So it's a great documentary, and obviously the documentary covers the adult struggle also to recreate, to get the money and to reshoot this scene. But and obviously there was limited footage other than the footage they had of the finished VHS project. And I think there was a few behind the scenes bits, but obviously it wasn't documented when they were making it. It was just what they had. But it was a quite inspiring documentary.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, it should put everybody off ever making a film, because of what they went through. When they're trying to recreate the bar scene where the bar is on fire, they basically almost burnt the house down of one of the kids that lived there.
Yeah.
And but to be fair, to give them their due, they were trying to recreate a huge budget Spielberg and Lucasfilm when they were 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever. They were very young with no money. And yeah, I mean, it looked crazy. And you saying about there was no behind the scenes necessarily, but what there was, and what I thought was used really well in the documentary was, they'd do a scene and then someone would shout, cut, and then they'd go, oh, I'm so fed up with this film, I've really had enough of wearing this out. This whip is, and then cut. And you'd, from those little segments before and after they were actually rolling, it really told a really good story of what their emotions were like throughout the 7 years it took to make.
And obviously the interviews and talking heads with the people, and they also spoke to, I think, a couple of people from the original film, especially the guy who goes, Hindi.
Yeah.
That English actor, big English actor.
He's Gimli, isn't he, in Lord of the Rings?
Is he? Right, yeah. Hindi. But yeah, it was great fun to watch, and just even the bit of them as adults now, and the sort of main guy trying to get this thing made and begging for time off work from his employer because they basically got rained off constantly and they had a certain amount of money in it. You get rained off, it costs you loads of money. They had quite a big crew. They built this plane from scratch, sort of, that sort of moved to a certain extent and looked pretty good. And they really went for it, didn't they? It must have cost, a load of money, but it was his passion to finish this. And that was, I really liked, watching the guy's passion to reduce his family being really behind him because, he was putting a lot of savings and his job.
Yeah, he had the whole relationship.
Although I just wonder how much of it was sort of slightly pushed
there
for drama.
Were some, we talked about on our text about a particularly overly dramatised section, which you'll have to watch the documentary and see what we're talking about. But there were some overly dramatic bits, and they really focused on one of the guy that actually played Indy. He ended up being a bit of a meth addict later on in life, and so they've kind of over, because they always talk about in documentaries you need peril, you need a degree of danger or emotion, to draw people in, and so they've put that in there. So, like you say, the guy that was the director had the issues with his boss and needing to take time off, and so there's all that in there. But even so, at the end of it, it's quite an uplifting documentary, and you finally get to see during the credit scene, you kind of get a side-by-side shot of what they actually captured.
I did find it slightly odd that the way they then... I didn't get... My criticism of the documentary was slightly the structure of it. And I was getting slightly confused at some points as to... I can't remember what it was, what they were talking about. or where things fitted in the scheme of things. And they're obviously making this new bit, and it wasn't overly clear. Were they going to cut that into the film and then sort of release it again to festivals with that bit in there? Because we never saw the whole film. Obviously, we have to watch it, and it obviously exists as a thing without that scene. I never got really a feeling of the explanation when they put it out there that scene was missing. And what did they? Did people just jump over it? Does the film work without that scene completely? I presume it does. It's just a fight scene.
Yeah. I mean, they had when they finally finished it when they were youngsters in the 80s and maybe even the early 90s. They did have a premiere of sorts, didn't they?
Yeah.
Got a lot of attendance in.
But then it was picked up, wasn't it? And I know Eli Roth got hold of it and he showed it to people, and Ain't It Cool News got to see it, and there was a screening of it at a festival, and it just became this sort of sensation, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, they got to meet Spielberg as well. So I don't know whether Spielberg saw the full version with the new, with the new scene shot. That was unclear, like you say.
I think that was before this documentary, wasn't it?
Oh, okay.
Because it looked like they went back to footage of it. They didn't cover it that meeting or anything. They just had a photograph or something. So I think again that was before this documentary was going to be made. And I thought just showing the bit, we'd been watching this whole documentary about them recreating this scene and slotting it into thing. And then I thought the credits were starting, and I thought they're not going to show us the finished thing. And then they did show us it, but part of the credits it sort of seemed a little bit of an afterthought. We'll just afterthought. We'll throw that in. I wanted to see it in context. I wanted to see young kids scene leading up, this scene being dropped in, then a little bit afterwards. It's like I felt from documentary making point of view that was a little bit clunky.
Yeah, there were a few moments like that in there. In fact, the very opening scene, I think the two of them are asking for some money from some guy in a house somewhere. Yeah. And when that started, I thought, I don't think they ever referenced him again. They came out with a check. And then I thought, who was that guy? And what was his link? And why did they get the money from him?
I think it was just them going around trying to raise the funds to shoot this scene, which was going to cost them $20,000 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was a bit misleading in places, and who was who, and who was the cinematographer who decided when they couldn't pay him to bail out on it, and then they scraped the money together. Is he the original guy that was part of their team?
I don't think so.
Or was he someone they got in to film it? It was a professional.
Yeah, he was a professional cinematographer in inverted commas.
So why did they do that? Just get your team together and do it.
Well, they fell out with the guy that was the kind of camera guy and effects guy, didn't they? For some reason they didn't want to.
Well, that effects guy.
Yeah, they didn't want to bring him back in. They were an odd bunch to a degree, weren't they? I thought they were very weird, especially the effects guy. He was an odd character.
He was a bit eccentric, wasn't he? And but he also seemed great, and he came up with his ideas and he's crazy as a kid. And I think it's a story of a bunch of people who were great friends for a long time, and then you eventually fall out, and there were girlfriends involved, and there was betrayal.
In life moves them. You kind of your interests kind of diverge, don't they? And it's one of those things that happens. But I mean, it was like bringing it back to the point of the show. It was inspirational. By the end of it, I was thinking, right, what can I go out and recreate? I mean, possibly inspirational in the wrong direction, making me want to recreate something that already exists. And I think someone says that in the documentary that says, what was the point of doing all this? You've just created something that already exists and you haven't done it very well.
Exactly. And I think they did it. It didn't make me feel I want to do that. It certainly made me want to go and make another film. It certainly made me remember the last film we made together and the sort of fun and difficulty that was.
That's the fun, aren't they?
I do feel I have a thing about being original, and I do have an issue with perhaps doing something shot for shot. I'd kind of see it's such a lot of work and effort and ultimately money. What is the point in doing that when you could just do an original piece? But
exactly,
But what I wanted to see, I think it would make an excellent Goonies style movie. I mean, the documentary was good, but how is this story of these kids deciding to shoot raiders? It could be set in the 80s over 7 years. How has that not been made into a film of their journey trying to recreate this wonderful film like Goonies?
Especially now when
it's a wonderful adventure with all the fallings out and
the 80s are so in vogue with things like Stranger Things and I think even when it finally comes out, the new Wonder Woman's going to be set in 1984 or something.
Yeah, but I think this would make a great story. In fact, leading up and including them as adults trying to recreate this scene.
Yeah,
and then
maybe that's going to happen.
That, I think that would make a good dramatised movie. The whole thing.
I'd watch it.
I've got written down here fake. I know we probably. Have you been timing this? Because
it's 28. We're 28 minutes in. Yeah.
Wow,
that's gone quick. Yeah.
We can chatter. We said we'd try and keep us to 20 minutes, but we can save this for another time because this leads into another section of this mind spuke empire, which sort of like everything we're calling tentatively, because it's just beta and everything's subject to change, but sort of creative kit, where we wanted to talk about the technical stuff we found that we use and stuff, without necessarily being a techie kit show or a kit review show or an unboxing show, but just the stuff we use. We all like kit, we're all gearheads and stuff like that, and so that will be a separate section. That's not this creative therapy section, which you have to say like this. But I've got fake inspiration, and this is probably again a subject for another time, but where I get inspired when I want to buy a new gadget, because I go, if I've got that gadget, I'll use that, and I'll film more using that gadget, that gimbal, that drone. I'll use that, and I'll suddenly make another film because that's exciting. Because so I really have to keep myself in check about being into all the kit as opposed to into the content and the actual story, the filmmaking, the photo, whatever. It doesn't matter about all the stuff it's used to make it. You need it, but I do suffer a little bit from fake inspiration where you get yourself a new gadget and then you think that will inspire you to do stuff, and ultimately, you might use it. You might, I don't know.
You're not alone. I think there's a whole industry based on that very fact. There's a lot of forums and websites that you could just follow where people talk endlessly about the cameras, and you can get easily dragged into that black hole. And it can prevent you from going out and being creative when you really are over concerned with maybe that new piece of kit. And I know I am, definitely guilty of that. But what you maybe need to do is look at things where you think, well, that thing there was shot on a fairly inexpensive camera, and it's brilliant, it's really well written, and there are examples of that sort of thing. They come out all the time. There's a film,
Raiders.
Well, exactly, yeah. All that
shot with just the basicest of equipment and and creativity and imagination. How do they? They went through 3 or 4 different boulders before they managed to build one that worked. Absolutely. And I'm sort of glad to say that this crazy amount of kit in front of me that's running this has all been party to me probably getting out, but it's all being used for something.
Good.
I need it. I don't think there's anything on this desk that is just a gimmick or I don't know, piece of wasted money, but
Good.
But I do have a drone in the studio that doesn't come out very often.
Well, next episode, fly it past your nose like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So we're 31 minutes. That's nearly 32 minutes. I don't know whether you want to wrap up there.
Shall we? Thank you, Steve. I'm going to push this lower third again because that looks cool. And I think this has been a good one. I think we're going to keep plugging away at these. And when lockdown's over, we're going to sort of hopefully be in the same room and do something. And we are thinking of introducing other people into these sort of, I don't like to call them interviews, but they're sort of informal chats about creativity.
Yeah. Maybe we'll even get a couch for them.
Get a couch? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, nice one, Steve. No one's mentioned your T-shirt yet. So
that's a shame. What was the point? I might as well have sat there without it on.
Mention if you like Steve's T-shirt in the comments below. So, brilliant. Cheers, Steve.
Okay, yeah, speak to you soon.
I will cut back to this. Say thanks for watching, everyone. Subscribe to the channel. There's a thing. I think you have to subscribe and push the bell to get notifications. I'm going to turn this subtle jazzy music up like this. See if you can hear that. Is that? I know I have to turn it on first. Oh, end with it being really clunky thing. There we go.
People like the curtain.
They do. It's like, don't look behind the curtain. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you next week.